And he has done several television series, of which one was called Digging for Jesus. Dr. Spivey.
I'm going to start by saying this isn't a debate about the existence of God. It's a debate about us mortals, the crooked timber of humanity, and how the practice of religion in general affects us. Karl Marx famously described religion as an opiate. Jonathan Miller thinks it's more of an amphetamine, gets people overexcited, and my own meagre religious experience disposes me to think of it as a sort of anaesthetic.
It is flat out not true to say that Karl Marx referred to religion as an opiate or an opium. What he says, I can quote it from memory, from his contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, is this. He says, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, the spirit of the spiritless situation. It is an opiate for the sufferer, for the people.
When John Lennon or Richard Dawkins asks us to imagine a world without religion, you find your mind wandering, and you're wondering what a world would look like without King's College Chapel, without the Taj Mahal, without Hagia Sophia, the Blue Mosque, the Parthenon, the Pantheon, the Sistine Chapel.
He also said, if we had no religion, how would we do without King's College Chapel, the Sistine Chapel, etc.? Well, you know, artists have to make a living, and in the time when the Sistine Chapel was built and its ceiling was painted, you know who had the money. Artists such as Michelangelo had to go where the patronage was. We shall never know the ceiling that Michelangelo might have painted if he had been commissioned to paint the Museum of Science, for example. We shall never know what Haydn's Evolution oratorio might have sounded like, or Beethoven's Mesozoic Symphony.
For the next hour or so, can I tell you this? In a sense, we are wasting our time debating that we'd be better off without religion. It's not an option. Religion is part of our human makeup, and it's going to be a very interesting time that we spend, but essentially it's not a topic for debate. It's the way that we are.
He says we're fighting a losing battle because religion is a part of our human nature. Well, speak for yourself. It's not a part of mine, and it's not a part of the great majority of my friends in universities in England and the United States and elsewhere.
Christopher Hitchens, will you take the question about, Christopher, the question of...
I'm sorry?
The question about the line-drawing Jew, the practice of religion being about the tone of living, a framework, and about self-restraint.
Well, that's dead easy, just like the rabbi just now. His religion is man-made too. He decides what he'd like to believe. It's a la carte. He says, shouldn't my children be taught, self-restraint, responsibility, care for others, and so on? I don't believe in the rest of it, don't believe in the prophets, don't believe in the mountaintop, don't believe in the revelation. Well, nor should you. But how dare you suggest to us that we couldn't teach our children self-restraint and respect for others and the golden rule? How dare
you? Secularism being its own religion, and these being its high priest.
Well, this is a slightly cheeky suggestion. If what Dr. Spivey says is right, and I'm inclined to agree with him, then of course there is a religious need in all of us, and if the religious belief systems that we've inherited are suddenly, for whatever reason, unpersuasive, it is obviously true that if what he says is true, people will look for other ways of satisfying the religious urge. They will write passionate books condemning the old religious belief, perhaps called the God delusion or something like that, and accuse the advocates of the false sciences of heresy. We recognise with a certain element of sadness our inability to go out and kill on behalf of our faith, which Professor Dawkins has obviously not lost. So maybe it is true.
Would one of the high priests like to respond? Richard?
I face two questions. Firstly, is religion true? And second, is it necessary for human psychological welfare or something of that sort? If it isn't true, then for anybody to maintain that somehow humans need it and you're wasting your time trying to get rid of it, what an amazingly patronizing and condescending thing to say. We intellectuals, of course, know that it's not true, but all those poor people out there, they need religion. I mean, what a condescending thing to say about all those people. Either it's true or it's not. And I have enough respect for people to say that if it's not true, people will reconcile themselves to that and will not find any need for it. Now, I was asked a specific question, is it in the genes? Is there some Darwinian reason for religiosity? Maybe there is, but that doesn't bear in the slightest degree on whether it's true. I care about whether it's true. I don't like it when people say, oh, humans need it, or we have it built into us in our genes, or Darwinian natural selection is built into it, therefore that somehow validates it. Of course it doesn't validate it. It merely says that it's been built into us by natural selection, just as all sorts of other probably disagreeable things have been built into us. Doesn't mean we can't try to cure ourselves.
Right. Okay, can I just... We're running late, and I know many of you probably have dinner appointments, but I'm now going to ask for a summing up from each of the people in turn. I'm going to ask them for a 2-minute summing up of what they have thought throughout the evening. But while they're doing that, you will be voting, and you will have brought into the hall a card like this. Please tear it in half and vote either for or against the motion. And if you wish to abstain, then don't tear it and put the whole lot into the box. People will come round with the boxes, and while they are doing that, we will hear from each of the speakers in turn. Okay? If you're going to hear them, you'll have to...
You need a spare one?
Yeah, well, it's okay, Chris.
At the risk of confusing everyone, can I try and organise a straw vote? I mean, a hands in the air sort of vote. And can I ask you to be absolutely...
We're taking a vote right now, really.
No, this is something different, Joe. This is a question. It's not about... It could have been about who in this audience has ever shown violence against their laptop. But I'll use a Wittgensteinian example. Hands up, and don't be bashful about this. I'm going to start off putting my own hand up. Who in this room has ever, or can ever remember, kissing a photograph? Slightly less than I might have anticipated, but if you've done that, you have behaved as, in a sense, Wittgenstein is saying we all behave as ceremonious animals. We do things that don't have reason.
Although I can't recall ever having kissed a photograph, I have wept when reading poetry, when listening to music. I think that those on this side have come to rather resent the suggestion that religion has a monopoly on emotion, on poetry. On sympathy, on empathy.
I think it might perhaps have been felt when I was chosen that the case for atheism should not be made by the spokesman for its moderate wing, Richard Dawkins. It might be okay to have at least one extremist on the panel. And I'll begin at once by recalling an exchange I had recently in Colorado Springs with a spokesman of America's evangelical broadcasting wing, a much overrated but nonetheless significant force in American politics. This broadcaster asked me, in response to my own statement of unbelief, he said, "I insist that you answer the following question, and that you answer it with a yes or a no. I braced myself. I accepted the challenge unseen. He said, you are to imagine yourself in a strange city where you've never been before. You are to imagine nightfall coming on and you to be without friends or succor in this town. And you are to ask yourself whether you would feel safer or less safe when you saw a dozen men coming towards you in the dusk, if you were to know that they had recently come from a prayer meeting. This is I think I can justifiably say I'm relaying to you, comrades, friends, brothers, sisters, the challenge that was put by the religious to me. You'll see at once it's not a yes-no answer. You can't give a yes-no answer to that, but I accept it anyway. I said, very well, I won't give a Sesame Street reply, but just without leaving the letter B, I have been in that situation. In Bombay, in Belfast, in Beirut, in Belgrade, in Baghdad, and many other places too. And I won't tell you about all of them, but let me just, as it were, fill in some of those latent blanks. In Belfast, the capital city of one of the provinces of this, our United Kingdom, as everybody here knows, everything, culturally, educationally, economically, politically, socially, has been very gravely retarded for at least a quarter of a century. At least half a century and maybe more since partition, and before that, because partition is both the outcome and the cause of sectarian warfare in this town, by the simple fact that there are people there who are willing to kill not just one another, but one another's children on the basis of what kind of Christian they are. If I was to add Bombay to this list, the city that was very nearly ruined by the sectarian partition of India in 1947, 1948, where once again people were told it's a matter of faith what kind of Indian you are. You may have to become a Pakistani if you're Muslim. You may have to lose your life on the proposition. You may not just be a Hindu. Bombay more or less survived this, the terrifying ethnic cleansing, but Bombay sort of recovered until recently when now its name has been changed, its minority citizens persecuted, intimidated, driven out by a new Hindu nationalist party, the Shiv Sena, that says that, again, if you do not follow the right God, if you don't accept the supernatural as a real force in everyday life, you are not worth. Religion is not provided to us by revelation. It doesn't come from the heavens. It doesn't come from the beyond. It doesn't come from the divine. It's man-made. And it shows. It shows very well that religion is created, invented, imposed by a species half a chromosome away from the chimpanzee. It shows, doesn't it? Well, why do we deceive ourselves on this point? And is there anywhere, I'm now going to wind up, is there anywhere of the places I've mentioned, and I exempt Basra and all the other B's I could take you around, we do believe in evidence, we do believe in skepticism, we do believe in reason, we hold our views with as much conviction and principle as any God-botherer does. But we are open to the argument, and we're going to prove it tonight to you. And don't let anyone dare to imply there's a moral equivalence between us and the fanatics and the fools and those who think they know God's will and can tell you what it is, who are our enemies, and your enemies too. So, I beg to propose the motion that stands in our name. Thank you.
A quote from Kurt Wise, who is an American geologist. He studied geology at Harvard, no less, under Stephen Jay Gould, no less, and he was set for a good career as an academic geologist, which all his life he had desperately wanted. The problem was, it came from within, it was his religious upbringing, his firewall of faith. And he couldn't reconcile the two, his scientific education with his religion, and he literally got a pair of scissors and went right through the Bible and cut out every verse that would have to go if he accepted his scientific education. And in the end, he decided there was nothing left of his Bible. He therefore tossed out science and said, and from then on, he said, with that in great sorrow, I tossed into the fire all my dreams and hopes in science. And he goes on, I am a young age creationist because that is my understanding of the scripture. As I shared with my professors years ago when I was in college, if all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a creationist because that is what the Word of God seems to indicate. Here I must stand. If religion can do that to a highly educated Harvard geologist, just think what it can do to an average school child or student. Thank you.
Also, I would, before you all rush off the moment I've given the results, say how grateful we all are for hearing this debate tonight. Thank you. It's been effective in making up a lot of minds. There are only 100 don't knows. And the vote now for the resolution that we'd be better off without religion is 1,205, and against, that's also gone up, 778. So the motion is carried. Thank you. And he has done several television series, of which one was called Digging for Jesus. Dr. Spivey.
I'm going to start by saying this isn't a debate about the existence of God. It's a debate about us mortals, the crooked timber of humanity, and how the practice of religion in general affects us. Karl Marx famously described religion as an opiate. Jonathan Miller thinks it's more of an amphetamine, gets people overexcited, and my own meagre religious experience disposes me to think of it as a sort of anaesthetic.
It is flat out not true to say that Karl Marx referred to religion as an opiate or an opium. What he says, I can quote it from memory, from his contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, is this. He says, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, the spirit of the spiritless situation. It is an opiate for the sufferer, for the people.
When the Sistine Chapel was built and its ceiling was painted, you know who had the money. Artists such as Michelangelo had to go where the patronage was. We shall never know the ceiling that Michelangelo might have painted if he had been commissioned to paint the Museum of Science, for example. We shall never know what Haydn's Evolution oratorio might have sounded like, or Beethoven's Mesozoic Symphony.
For the next hour or so, can I tell you this? In a sense, we are wasting our time debating that we'd be better off without religion. It's not an option. Religion is part of our human makeup, and it's going to be a very interesting time that we spend, but essentially it's not a topic for debate. It's the way that we are.
He says we're fighting a losing battle because religion is a part of our...
John Lennon or Richard Dawkins asks us to imagine a world without religion. You find your mind wandering, and you're wondering what a world would look like without King's College Chapel, without the Taj Mahal, without Hagia Sophia, the Blue Mosque, the Parthenon, the Pantheon, the Sistine Chapel.
He also said, if we had no religion, how would we do without King's College Chapel, the Sistine Chapel, etc.? Well, you know, artists have to make a living, and in the time